They say she bathed in blood. But the truth is darker than any legend. In the dead of winter, 1609, a village girl named Kata vanished on her way to Castle Chaktic. She was 17, healthy, known for her thick black braid and laughter that echoed through the market. By morning, her family searched the woods. By nightfall, 3 more girls were missing. None returned. And no one dared speak of what truly happened because they knew where they had gone. They just couldn't prove it. Watch till the end. What you'll discover about Countess Elizabeth Bathory will haunt you. Subscribe. Like, if you dare. The first to disappear were peasant girls, young, poor, replaceable. Their parents begged. Some even approached the gates of Chaktica, only to be turned away by silent guards in iron helms. "Your daughter isn't here," they'd say. "She probably ran away." But the villagers knew better. They'd seen the servants bring girls up the hill, heard the wails at night echo down through the frost-bitten valley. Still, no one spoke aloud. You don't accuse nobility, not in Hungary, not in 1609. But something had changed. Whispers crept through the forests like fog. The Countess no longer cared to hide. She rode through town with blood beneath her nails. Her coaches arrived empty and left soaked red. A tavern owner claimed he saw a maid leap from the castle wall. A shepherd found her body days later, frozen and broken, her hands torn from rope. And yet not a single noble raised a voice. Inside the castle, her servants moved like ghosts. They obeyed without blinking. Some had once tried to run. They were now walls. Flesh built into stone. It wasn't just death. It was invention. Tools no one had seen before. Devices with teeth and blades, pulleys and clamps. Screams that didn't sound human echoed from the West Wing at night. A section even guards refused to patrol. They said the Countess liked to experiment, to see what made a girl stop breathing, to learn how much blood was in the human body, and how fast she could get it out. One maid, Anna, barely 15, had been seen limping for weeks. No one asked why. Then one day, she was gone. And when the butcher's boy delivered meat to the kitchens, he saw a stain on the corridor floor so deep it had turned black. The cook kicked him out, threatened to gut him like a hog. He never returned. By spring, it wasn't just poor girls. Daughters of minor nobles, chambermaids from other estates, even a tutor's niece went missing. That's when Count Georgi Thurzo, once a friend of the Bathory family, received a letter written in shaking ink from a priest. "If you value the soul of Hungary," it read, "come see what she's doing." And so he did, but not openly. Not yet. First, he sent a man, a spy. He never came back. The locals called it the mouth of the mountain. Castle Chaktic sat high on the rock, its jagged towers slicing the sky like spears. From below, it looked abandoned. No flags, no movement, just dark stone and wind. But those who lived near it knew better. Smoke rose from its chimneys. Wagons rolled in under the veil of night. And behind the thick wooden doors, something terrible was alive. The spy Thurzo sent was a man named Joseph Nadazdi, a low-ranking court scribe with a talent for silence. He posed as a steward seeking employment, armed with a forged letter of recommendation and nerves of iron. He made it to the gate. He made it inside. That was the last anyone saw him. 2 weeks later, his horse returned alone. Thurzo waited no longer. He assembled a small band of men, guards he trusted, loyal beyond coin. They rode under the guise of an unannounced visit. No armor, no heralds, just quiet riders beneath a gray sky. Meanwhile, inside the castle, Elizabeth Bathory was preparing for the solstice. She stood before a long mirror, its surface not made of glass, but polished black metal, distorted, and dark. A maid brushed her hair, each stroke slow and trembling. One wrong movement, and it would be her fingers next, or her eyes. Elizabeth turned. "How old do I look?" The girl didn't answer quickly enough. Elizabeth didn't blink. "I asked you a question." "19, my lady," the maid whispered. Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Then I'm younger than you." That night, 5 new girls arrived in a cart covered with tarps, none older than 16. All told, they'd be trained for service. None would leave alive. One was taken to what the servants called the Red Room. It wasn't its color. The walls were gray stone, the table wood. But by morning, it always bled. A drain in the center led straight to the lower levels, where rats and rot met what was left behind. No screams were heard, not because there weren't any, but because the walls were thicker than fear itself. Elizabeth didn't do it for money. She didn't do it for power. She did it for pleasure, for science, for curiosity. She kept records, observations. She noted how long it took for a girl to bleed out when hung upside down, how fear altered the taste of the blood, how youth smelled different. She believed in purification through pain, in beauty through death. Some say she believed the blood kept her young. Others say that was just the prettiest lie she told herself. Outside, Thurzo and his men reached the outer courtyard. The guards let them in. Too late did they realize their mistake. The stables were full, but not of horses. Beneath a moldy tarp, a man groaned. It was Joseph. His face beaten, eyes swollen shut, tongue cut. But he was alive, just barely. And what he had scrawled on the floor with the last of his blood was a single word. Hell. The word was fresh. A smear of red across stone, uneven and jagged, like it had been carved with a broken nail. Thurzo didn't speak. He simply looked at it, then turned to his men and nodded once. No more secrecy, no more waiting. They moved. Inside the castle, torches flickered along the corridor walls. The halls were strangely quiet. No laughter, no footsteps, only the distant groan of wind through high windows. One soldier murmured a prayer. Another kept his hand near his blade, though he'd never drawn it in real battle. What they were walking into was not war. It was something else. They reached the west wing. The door was thick, bolted from the outside. That alone told them enough. Thurzo ordered it open. It took 2 men and a crowbar. What they found behind it would follow them into sleep for the rest of their lives. 3 girls, barely breathing. One chained upright, her legs purple from blood pooling. Another curled on the floor, her skin blistered in patterns. Not random, but deliberate. Symbols. The third stared without blinking, lips sewn shut crudely with horsehair thread. The room stank of iron, bile, and old soap. Buckets stood in corners, some full, some not. Along the walls, hooks. A cage dangled from the ceiling, shaped like a woman, its spikes long rusted. Inside it, bones. Thurzo whispered, "God help us." And still, this was only the beginning. The soldiers spread out. Some searched the lower chambers, others stayed with the wounded. One of them, a young man named Istvan, followed a hallway that curved downward into the earth. The air turned colder, thicker, as if it resisted breath. At the end of the corridor stood a narrow door with a handle worn smooth from years of use. He pushed it open. Inside was a chapel, but not to God. The altar was black. Candles burned in sconces carved with grotesque faces. On the walls, crude paintings. Women with mouths open in agony, their eyes turned to a figure in crimson robes. Behind the altar, a basin, wide, shallow, rimmed in gold, and full. Blood. On a shelf nearby were jars, dozens, labeled in Latin and Hungarian, skin, teeth, eyes, hair, lungs, organs removed and preserved like collector's trinkets. There were ledgers, too. Dates, times, outcomes. Elizabeth had kept records of every experiment, every method, every name. Upstairs, in her private chambers, Elizabeth stood before a tall window, her hands clasped behind her back. She was dressed in deep burgundy, her neck adorned with onyx and pearls. She knew they were here. She had watched them arrive, and she wasn't afraid. A maid stood nearby, trembling. Elizabeth turned. "Do you know why they call me a monster?" she asked. The maid said nothing. Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Because they don't understand what I've done, what I've learned. But they will. One day." Then, calmly, she reached for the silver bell on her desk and rang it once. The sound echoed through the hall. And below, Thurzo heard it, clear, cold, like the toll of a grave. The bell's ring wasn't loud, but in the silence of the castle it carried like a scream. It was a signal, not of surrender, but of control. Elizabeth Bathory wasn't running, she was welcoming them. Thurzo didn't wait. He gave the order. Secure the rooms, find the Countess, and for God's sake, don't split up. But it was too late for that. The layout of the castle twisted like a labyrinth. Hallways that led nowhere. Staircases that bent at strange angles. Doors that opened to brick walls. And behind one of those doors, they heard it. A girl, crying. Two men forced the latch and stepped into a narrow chamber, little more than a stone cell. A girl sat chained to the floor, arms covered in welts, scalp raw where hair had been torn. But she was alive. When she looked up, her mouth trembled, but she didn't speak. Then, with shaking fingers, she pointed. Toward the opposite wall, carved into the stone, almost invisible in the shadows, was a message scratched by bloodied fingernails. "She drinks." The men stared. One dropped his torch. Meanwhile, Thurzo climbed the eastern tower. It was there he found her. Elizabeth Bathory stood in her study as if nothing were wrong. The windows were open. Snow drifted in through the broken glass. On her desk, a quill, an open book, and a cup of thick, dark liquid she didn't try to hide. "Count Thurzo," she said smoothly. "I wasn't expecting you so soon." He didn't speak, didn't move. She tilted her head. "You came without warning. No formal charge, no warrant. That's not how justice works, is it?" He stepped forward slowly. "Where are they?" Her smile didn't fade. "Who?" "The girls. I've employed many over the years. Where are the ones who didn't leave?" That's when she laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't mad. It was worse. It was knowing. "You think you're the first to come here with questions?" she asked. "The others were just quieter about it. Nobles protect nobles, remember?" "Not anymore," he said. Something shifted behind her eyes. A flicker. Not of fear, but calculation. "You want confessions? Go ask the servants. They talk more than they should." And she was right. Because downstairs, the interrogations had begun. One by one, her inner circle broke. Ilona Jo, the housekeeper, wept and begged. She admitted to helping bind the girls, to holding them down during the tests. Dorothea Sentes, a former wet nurse, confessed to heating the irons, to cleaning the blades. Even Fichko, the mute servant, scribbled trembling drawings of torture devices he had helped carry into the cellar. But the most damning came from Anna Darvulia, once Elizabeth's closest companion. Her voice cracked as she spoke. She said their fear made her feel young. She said blood was like wine, the fresher, the sweeter. "How many?" Thurzo asked. Anna's eyes filled with tears. "I lost count after 80. And still, outside, snow kept falling. By morning, the castle was no longer silent. Torches burned in every corridor. Soldiers moved from room to room, dragging crates of evidence and leading shackled servants through the snow. Screams no longer echoed in secret. Now they were dragged into daylight, where no one could deny what had happened behind those walls. Thurzo didn't sleep. He wrote. A full account, addressed directly to the King of Hungary. Every detail, the girls, the rooms, the tools, the testimonies, and the Countess. But justice, even for monsters, moved slowly when titles were involved. Elizabeth Bathory was not marched to the gallows. She was not beheaded. She was not stripped and beaten before the crowd. Number that was for peasants. For nobles, even ones drenched in the blood of over 100 girls, there were rules. The court gathered weeks later in the city of Bitcha. Elizabeth wasn't there. She never faced a jury, never stood before the victims' families. She remained locked inside Choctacha, guarded day and night, while her servants took the fall. Ilona Jo and Dorotia Sentes were found guilty of witchcraft and murder. They had their fingers torn out with heated iron tongs before being burned alive. Fichko, the mute boy, was beheaded swiftly. Anna Darvulia died before the trial. Some whispered Elizabeth had poisoned her once she started talking. But the Countess? She denied everything. She sent letters, calm, articulate, carefully worded. I am a widow, she wrote. My enemies seek to ruin me. These girls were thieves, liars, disobedient maids who ran off in the night. She blamed illness, suicide, wild dogs, anything but the truth. Yet the evidence was overwhelming. Thurzo returned to Choctaw, this time not as a guest, but as a jailer. On January 25, 1611, Elizabeth Bathory was sentenced without a formal trial. Punishment, permanent confinement. Room, her own. The sentence was cruel in its silence. She would not see daylight again. The door to her chamber was sealed with stone and mortar. A single slot remained, for food, and nothing more. No mirror, no fire, no voice but her own. Some say she screamed for days. Others say she laughed. Servants claimed she whispered to the walls, sang lullabies to ghosts, that she counted her fingers, then recounted, forgetting one every week, that she scratched the stone until her nails bled, that she dreamed of blood, of skin, of the girls who once begged her to stop. She lasted 3.5 years. In August of 1614, a guard checked the slot and found the bowl untouched. Elizabeth Bathory was lying on the floor, eyes open, hands folded, dead. No funeral, no monument, no priest, just a hole in the stone floor and silence. But legends do not stay buried, and hers was just beginning. They sealed the room again. No markings, no names, just stone. But outside those walls, the name Elizabeth Bathory began to bleed into history like the very blood she once spilled. Not as a countess, not as a noblewoman, but as something far darker, a myth, a warning, a ghost that never stopped whispering. In the years that followed, the villages surrounding Choctaw refused to speak her name. The castle was abandoned, its windows broken by storms, its floors overrun by moss and rats. Children dared each other to climb the hill, but none crossed the gate. They said the stones were still wet inside, that screams echoed if you listened long enough, that the wind carried her voice, asking for just one more girl. But the story didn't stay local. In Vienna, travelers shared tales of a Blood Countess who bathed in virgin blood to preserve her youth. In Prague, pamphlets spread illustrations of her torture devices, some real, some fantasy. In London, poets wrote of a woman who fed on suffering, who drank pain like wine. And with every retelling, the line between truth and nightmare dissolved. Some say she killed over 600 girls. Others say it was closer to 36. But the numbers stopped mattering. What mattered was what she became. A symbol of cruelty in silk gloves. A reminder that the worst horrors don't wear fangs or claws. They wear jewels. They smile. They curtsy. They sign decrees in ink and blood alike. Centuries passed. In the 18th century, Chaktich Castle was partially dismantled for stone. Locals used the bricks to build barns, wells, homes. Pieces of her domain spread across the land like a curse too heavy to carry whole. Yet the foundation remained, unshaken, waiting. In the 20th century, historians tried to revise the story, to cast her as a victim of politics, of jealous men, of misogyny. They pointed to gaps in the records, to the lack of direct evidence, to the fact that nobles often feared powerful women. But when they returned to the documents, the testimonies, the ledgers, the cellars, the blood was still there, faded, but unmistakable. Because some things don't lie, not a girl's scream, not a rusted chain, not stone that still smells like fear. Elizabeth Bathory didn't live forever, but the shadow she cast, it never died.